Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast live here on Thursday, January the 30th. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, reporter and writer here at the 440 Sports Podcast Network. You can follow me on Twitter at JT_Ruhnke. Once again, though, no Stoney because Papa Bear is unfortunately still very, very sick. We wish him the best. Reminder on our show yesterday, if you did not send him those pictures of lovely seafood, make sure you do that today. Definitely do that. It definitely wouldn't make him even more sick. We hope that he recovers as soon and quickly as possible because he will still be here for the rest of the week at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. Last day for me because practice is wrapping up and whatnot, but our location here is a little different, as you might notice. I'm coming to you live from the Football and Other F Words cave here in Mobile, Alabama, thanks to Zach and Stoney, Zach Lyons of 104.5 The Zone and Cover 2. Appreciate them letting me use their studio here. And, we're going to recap everything that I saw throughout the week of practices, talk about, maybe some philosophical things about quarterbacks and the quarterback play we saw this week, along with who the Titans, I think, should ultimately target out of this crop. Every single year we talk about how big of a deal the Senior Bowl is for the Titans the last 2 years. 8 players out of the last 2 drafts have been players participating in the Senior Bowl. All that and more on today's show, brought to you by our wonderful sponsors, Sinkers Beverages and ML Rose. Thank you to both of those wonderful establishments for making it all happen. Reminder before we continue on here, if you are joining us live on Twitter or Facebook, do us a favor and head on over to the 440 Sports YouTube channel where you can join the conversation as I look over on my monitor here to some of the comments here. Eddie saying, "Hey boys, how's Stoney feeling?" I could shout out, but I think he's once again taking yet another nap in there. So we'll have to see. Paul saying, throwing another shrimp on the Barbie for Stoney down under. Appreciate your thoughts there. And Eddie saying, "I need the real report on Dart. National guys make it sound like he's played himself into the first round." We're going to talk about that. And I think that's where we're going to start off the show. But before we do that, some takeaways from this Senior Bowl. We've talked already a lot at the beginning of the draft cycle about how this class maybe is not as strong as previous classes, specifically last year's class, that when you went into Senior Bowl week seemed like a pretty stacked cast. Our expectations were that maybe this would have been some of the best talent out of this maybe down draft year. And my expectations were certainly tempered. Still kind of came away feeling more or less let down by some of the talent here. Maybe that has to do with half of the Senior Bowl team just totally kind of mailing in their practices on days. It felt like the American team, led by one of the Browns assistant coaches, just really didn't do anything at all, which, if you can somewhere out there bet on the Senior Bowl, I would put all my money on the national team solely based off the fact that they looked like they practiced like a real team and actually did something. But I think it goes without saying that because I still continue to feel let down about this class and, with the draft in general, I think it's more of a cautionary tale into this draft and how there's not that many, standout blue chip players like there may have been last year, or impact players that are really worth the first round grade, which I think goes into the fact that most of the talent we saw here today, I think, most people would say that it is day 2, early day 3 talent that were, guys who are still going to not necessarily, be rotational guys, but they're still going to be able to start. But it's not that top end talent here this week. And so with that, I think the really the worst spot in the Senior Bowl was the quarterback play that we saw. Jalen Milroe, Tyler Shuck, Jackson Dart, Dylan Gabriel, all of these guys this week coming in certainly had some interesting things about them, but ultimately I think after 3 days of practice, the only one who I think really continues to excel got better throughout the week was Jackson Dart. And I think that's a lot of the reason why you're hearing the buzz about how teams really like him in interviews. National guys seem to be getting pretty high on him. I think he ended up having the best week out of any of these quarterbacks, both on the field and in interviews, from what I heard. The other guys in this class, we'll talk about the other big two there. Dylan Gabriel for me this week. I don't know about all of you in the comments. You can chime in here, but Dylan Gabriel's just completely off of my radar after this week. I mean, he was out there kind of he was shorter than some of the running backs out there. And Dylan Gabriel will forever be one of the best college football quarterbacks out there with the records that he broke. But there's no chance for me to really see a path to success for him in the NFL. He was really disappointing. And then the other one, Jalen Milroe, for me, was super disappointing. I think that was across the board. A lot of his flaws that he may have tried to come out here and kind of fix this week certainly reared their ugly head yet again. And for me, in my quarterback rankings, he has fallen to QB6 overall. Jackson Dart, though, like I said, has really risen up the board. I'm playing around with having him as quarterback 3. Now quarterback 3 in this draft class, right? Is that still worthy of a day 2 pick? Borderline day 1. We know how important that position is. There's still a lot of things that to Jackson Dart's game that I think need to be improved, specifically a lot of the operational things. We saw him continue to struggle taking snaps under center, yet another fumble today. But those are also things that can be coached up. It's not, an innate thing with Jackson Dart. And so for me right now, as it sits after the Senior Bowl, my top, let's look at, top 7 quarterbacks in this draft class right now. Shedeur Sanders is still number 1 for me. Very close though. Cam Ward, those two, I think 1 and 2 interchangeable. May change my mind down the road, but ultimately I still do think that those two belong outside the top 5. Personally, I talked to a lot of big national media folks this week who shared some of those sentiments that even though one of those or both of those quarterbacks may be picked in the top 5, come draft day, does it necessarily mean that they deserve to be based on their skill and talent level? Not sure, but still, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, 1 and 2 for me. Jackson Dart right now, I think he did enough for him to have that spot right now. Obviously, if Will Howard was here this week, he opted out because of the national championship. I think he was riding a lot of good momentum and probably had the best chance out of any of these quarterbacks to really solidify themselves as the QB3. But Will Howard, quarterback 4. Quinn Ewers, I think, did himself a favor by not being here. He's my quarterback 5. Jalen Milroe, quarterback 6. And then Tyler Shuck, quarterback 7. Tyler Shuck had a good day 1 and day 2, although didn't really impress me during the media availability and interview portion. And so, there was some consistency there, but then started to fall off a little bit towards the end. So that was a little disappointing. All in all, the quarterbacks this year compared to what we saw last year with Bo Nix and Michael Penix and the likes of those guys, definitely a major letdown. And so, like I was saying before, many experts are not high on these quarterbacks. It is a quarterback draft that if you really need one, it may not be the time, as Zach says, Seth Hennigan erasure. I mean, Seth Hennigan was here. He was here and he did some things, but I don't know if he did enough for me to put him in that top conversation here. And obviously also Canadian canon erasure. I don't know how big of a chance he had to actually make an impact, but this is my stance. I saw a lot of talk on Twitter and social media today about how if the Titans want to go with a quarterback, you take your guy in the first and you don't play the game of trying to find value. And I don't necessarily agree with that necessarily. If you are along the lines here of Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are 1 and 2, but you don't feel great about taking them at that spot, I think there are still so many other needs right now on this team. that an Abdul Carter could fix, that Travis Hunter could potentially fix, depending on if he converts more full time to wide receiver over cornerback. But I do still think that there are things to like about a Jackson Dart or a Will Howard, and I don't think that's out of the question. Now, is it out of the question right now with the picks the Titans have? Yes, I definitely do think it is. Taking a Jackson Dart or a Will Howard at 35 would be a little rich for my blood, but we continue to talk about how the best avenue for this team getting better in a hurry is to accumulate draft picks in the top 100, just like Mike Borgonzi and Chad Brinker have alluded to, getting as many picks as possible so that they can continue to try to build this draft, develop, and retain kind of structure here. And so I think at this point in time, trading back to get more assets and then go out and get some of these Senior Bowl guys who can potentially make an impact from day one could be one of the better avenues here. And that's where I think I stand on the quarterback conversation right now. Biggest winner this week, Jackson Dart. Biggest loser, Jalen Milroe. And, other guys sprinkled in between. Got to give a shout out to our wonderful and amazing sponsors here that made this week all possible for all of you back in Nashville watching this now or afterwards. Sinkers Beverages, located in East Nashville, serving that community for nearly 40 years. They're a 4-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year, and for good reason, because they simply have the best selection of beer, wine, and liquor that you can find in the city. When you go over there, make sure you sign up for their in-crowd program. If you can't make it out, don't worry. They deliver the booze to you. Simply search Sinkers on Uber Eats, and they drive so you can drink responsibly. Also, huge shout out to the Hot Read Podcast main sponsor, ML Rose, with 7 wonderful locations in the Nashville area: Capitol View, Franklin, Gallatin, Melrose, Mount Juliet, Sylvan Park, and a new location coming soon to East Nashville. I absolutely love ML Rose. I've had some good seafood here. I've already been to Winsel's twice. I may be going twice in one day, depending on what happens tonight. Had to, especially on the 1-year anniversary of the Easton Freeze taco picture, maybe have to double dip there, but had some amazing food. But I'm ready to get back to Nashville. And one of the first stops that I make when I'm back is going to ML Rose, because they simply have some of the best selection of starters, snacks, and of course their craft burgers with over 25 beers on tap. How can you not like a place like ML Rose? Thank you to them for sponsoring the show. Let's talk about another area of need that the Titans really could do well to address this draft cycle. It's the edge position. And we certainly saw a lot of good edge rushers this week. Mike Green, I think, out of Marshall, 6'3", 251, was, for my money's worth, the player of the week. He opted out of today, but the proof was pretty much in the pudding with this guy. There were questions about what he could do against better competition. Obviously, going to Marshall and leading the nation in sacks, you wonder about the talent, right? Who he was going up against, how easy it was for him. He changed that narrative pretty quick this week, bulldozing a guy like Josh Connerly, someone who could project as high as offensive tackle 1. He's built like a brick wall, but still has some of the most insane bend I've seen out of any edge rusher in this class so far. I think that if there was anyone who made themselves the most money this week, he is definitely up there in the conversation. Right now, I believe if you look at the NFL mock draft database, he currently doesn't even sit in the top 50 of players here. So he's one of the biggest risers in this class. If I even look here, it doesn't even look like he is in the top 100. So, this guy very much has the opportunity to play himself into the first round. Now, does that mean that he still could be on the Titans' radar at 35? I think it's very possible. These things, he may have a round 1 grade, but like we continue to say, how many players truly have a round 1 grade in this draft class? I could see him at 35 being an option for this Titans team if they do elect to maybe trade back, select a quarterback at the 101, or take a guy like Travis Hunter or something like that. Double dip, taking a Travis Hunter and then a Mike Green would certainly be an avenue that they could still potentially take. And I would not hate that at all. Another guy who I think stepped up this week in the edge position is Shamar Stewart, the edge rusher out of Texas A&M. His two counterparts who were supposed to be here, Nick Scorton and Shamar Turner, not to be confused with Shamar Stewart, both opted out, leaving him to kind of shine the brightest out of the three. Comes from a very dominant Texas A&M defensive line. He's one of the guys who I think made himself the most money because he was a guy that I already had on my radar, someone that the Titans could potentially target at the 35th overall pick. Great at setting the edge, something the Titans certainly struggled with this past year when dealing with mobile quarterbacks. And he was a guy who immediately on film, you knew that he could set the edge. But as strong as he is, 6'5", 281, you sometimes did not see that play strength translate on a lot of his tape. And so that was one of my biggest questions this week. And Shamar Stewart certainly looked like a guy who went out there to prove himself, showed that power, absolutely bulldozed over Emory Jones on one play to strip sack Seth Hennigan on day 2. He opted out as well today. One of the guys who also firmly supplanted him, I would say, anywhere from the 20th pick in the draft to the 40th. He's going to go somewhere late day 1, early day 2. Those are two guys who I think are definitely in play for the Titans at the 35th pick. We talk about all the time, just like last year, Tavondre Sweat, coming from a defensive line like the Texas Longhorns last year with Byron Murphy on there, another potential first round pick. How much, did the other person being there affect from what Shamar Stewart could do or affect what Tavondre Sweat could do? Same thing here. Nick Scorton, how much of him being there on the field affected what Shamar Stewart could do? Stewart came out here and showed that he can play, no doubt. So I think that's an interesting one. Also got to give a shout out to two of the defensive linemen. Walter Nolan, who I think also is continuing to rise up boards. He may be just flat out the best player that was here this week from a traits and tape aspect. I think he also helped him out here this week, along with the University of Kentucky defensive lineman, Dion Walker. He was very, very large. One of the largest people here this week, and certainly made his statement. Now, we talk all the time. The Titans don't necessarily need a defensive lineman, but Jeffrey Simmons is not getting any younger, so that'll be something to watch. And a guy that you should keep your eyes out for as we get down the line here in the draft cycle. A couple of guys who I think we wanted to watch this week that maybe took a dip in their stock or maybe just kind of stayed the same. Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss, I think, what he was out there. He was out there, but didn't notice him too much. Has some good tape, but also comes from that defensive line that has Nolan and Jared Ivey. So definitely maybe took a little bit of a hit. And I don't think there's any edge rusher in this class who took more of a hit than Landon Jackson. The edge rusher out of Arkansas looks, he's absolutely built with his shoulder pads on, looks like a unit of a human being, but continued day in and day out to struggle in one-on-one drills and as well, the 7-on-7s. This is a guy who I think definitely hurt himself this week. I do still think there's things to like on tape, the physicality, some of the bend, but some of that was not here this week. And I think he had one of the more disappointing performances of the week. And then Jared Ivey, I think he stands firm in his place. He had some nice things going on, but ultimately the Ole Miss edge rushers were a little bit of a disappointment along with Landon Jackson. And as Brinkerhead Snake brings up here, Jaden Higgins, we'll get to him in just a second. I have some thoughts on Higgins. Stevie here in the comments saying tighten up. Zach saying, we don't talk enough about the bad week Milam had. We're going to get into him and some of the offensive linemen here. A reminder, if you're joining us live on Twitter or Facebook and want to get in on the conversation here, do us a favor and head on over to the 440 Sports YouTube channel where you can join the conversation. Let me know who you think stood out, and we can talk about them. Let's go to the offensive tackles here. Pretty easy for me. There were 4 guys who stood out all week. Josh Carnley Jr., the Oregon tackle, he was one of the guys who I think, kind of cemented himself as a pro's pro this week with what he did on the field. Certainly had a few bad reps. The Mike Green one definitely comes to mind, but he was one of the more put together linemen this week. On the left side, didn't play a lot on the right. Would be another interesting conversation if the Titans were to take a offensive tackle in the second round, or if they were to trade back in the first and look at one of these guys in the mid-teens. I think that's a conversation you can have. I know a lot of people were pushing back on my idea that the Titans could target an offensive tackle, but or even an offensive guard on the right side. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily out of the question, considering you have a guy like Bill Callahan in the building. It still very much is a need, as much as edge or quarterback, even though it's not maybe as important as the quarterback position, still as much of a need as interior linebacker, as safety, as all of these things for the Titans. And so could they go with one of these guys like a Josh Connerly and figure it out, move him to the right side, potentially? 2 other tackle guys that I think were really, really interesting this week. Ariante Ursary is a guy who really popped on the left side, probably the second best left tackle for me, and maybe the second best tackle here all week. Really showed some good things out there, very consistent. And I think that's one of the things that you want to see from offensive linemen. Ursary would be another intriguing option if the Titans were to take him around. Currently on the consensus big board, he is 33, so close to that 35th overall pick. Would be very interesting to see what they would do with him if they were to take him. And then one of the biggest risers, I think, from this week, Anthony Belton out of North Carolina. This was a guy who played all over the place this time around here. He was a guy who played both on the left side, both on the right side, maybe even a little bit in the interior on day one. But this is a guy who, out of any of these guys, showed the most consistency in his versatility. And I think if the Titans, were to, maybe we'll see how far he rises. I know he is not in the top 100 right now, according to the consensus big board, but he's a guy who I think has, every opportunity to rise up the big, the consensus boards here and find himself as a late day 3 guy. Once again, reinforcing the idea that the Titans would do well to trade back from the 101, from 235. One of those, I think, how much you still need on this team really, really impacts what you can do in this draft. And while Mike Borgonzi and the Titans brass said they're never going to pass up on a good player when you know that they're going to be good, you start to wonder still how much that still outweighs the amount of holes on this team. Stevie in the comments here saying, it's such a deep edge class. I can't believe so many people want to go edge in the first round. And I get your point, right? However, going back to one of our earlier shows this week, we talked about how over the last 6, 7, 8 years with this class, or with the draft, the first edge rusher who comes off the board usually ends up being a star impact player, outside of maybe the one caveat, Trayvon Walker. If you have the opportunity to take Abdul Carter, the best edge in the draft, I do still think that there's the possibility that he is the guy they want and the guy that they potentially could take there and not worry about the edge position. But as Adam says here, you definitely could also just double up on edge. There's nothing out of the realm of possibility that says you could fix your entire edge group in one offseason, because I still do think more likely than not, a guy like Harold Landry gets cut. Arden Key is an interesting conversation, maybe moves into a more rotational role with their young guys. But like, if you were able to get Abdul Carter and Mike Green, like, you're pretty much set for the draft, develop, and retain model here. And there are always edge rushers every single year, but if you have the opportunity to take the best of the best in such a position of need, and then find the value in other positions like wide receiver, like interior linebacker, like offensive line. Obviously, quarterback is such an enigma for this team. We don't know what they're going to do. You kind of you got to take the guy, right? I think that's the argument there. But also, I do think there's a lot of depth here. Certainly, as a team that wants to also develop late round talent, there's an argument there for that as well. And so I don't necessarily disagree with you on that one. It's going to be very interesting as we get closer to the combine, the more things we hear about this class and whatnot. I do still not putting out of the realm of possibility. As much as we loved Mike Green, there were still whispers about character concerns. Could those still arise? Maybe, and that always changes things. But I do still think that the Titans would do well to come away in this draft class with 2 edge rushers at least, because it, like you said, it is a very, very deep class. One more offensive lineman that I think made themselves the most money this week, Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State, was one of the guys who had some of the most consistent tape. On day 3, it seemed like some of the defensive players started to figure him out a little bit, but rave reviews from a lot of scouts and a lot of national folks around Hancock Whitney Stadium. He's a guy who I think has every opportunity to find himself in the late first round. Would he be available for the Titans at 35 if they were to go with veteran right tackle and find that guard to replace Dylan Radins, because they don't have one under contract right now? I think he could be someone, but he's one of the guys who, probably could have opted out if they wanted to, but he stuck it out today. Had a little bit of a down day as they started to figure him out, but still there's a lot to like there. And then we move to the wide receiver position, as Brinkerhead says. Shamar Stewart, please. I would definitely love a guy like Shamar Stewart. We move to the wide receivers, and interesting class, I would say. No one that, blew us away. Last year, the buzz coming away from the Senior Bowl was Ladd McConkey, Ricky Pearsall, maybe even Roman Wilson, Malachi Corley. Obviously, some of those guys didn't exactly pan out. Roman Wilson hurt, Malachi Corley kind of down the depth chart of the New York Jets organization. But guys like Ladd McConkey and Ricky Pearsall were guys who went into the league and made an impact from day one, or in Ricky Pearsall's case, as soon as he was able to come back from being shot. I think this year's class, at least at the Senior Bowl, certainly was more of a pick your flavor kind of class. A lot of more smaller, short, smaller bodied slot receivers. A lot of guys who I think, would do well to be a day 2 pick. Now, could the Titans justify taking one of these guys who we saw this week at 35? Probably not. I don't think there was anyone that we saw this week that would be in this 35. But if they were, once again, to trade down or find some more capital in that 3rd round on late day 2, I could be very interested in a Tez Johnson, in a Jalen Noel, in a maybe even Jaden Higgins. Although I do think he had a up and down week. Certainly not coming off of the entire week. He wasn't one of the guys who stood out the most. Jalen Royals, also an interesting prospect. Ty Felton, all of these guys who maybe you can find around the late day, day 2, early day 3, could be very interesting. And I had the opportunity to sit down with an old friend of the Hot Read podcast to talk about some of these wide receivers. And here was that conversation. Guys, it's JT Ruhnke here from the Hot Read podcast with a familiar face that you guys might recognize, former host of the Hot Read podcast, Easton Freeze, new dad, got the sunglasses on too.
How long can you be a new dad? It's been half a year.
That's still pretty new.
When's the expiration date? Is it up to a year, you think?
I feel like you get a year.
Okay.
Just like, as you can see, we are in Hancock Whitney Stadium here after day 2 of the Senior Bowl. To finish your question, I feel like just like a rookie head coach gets to be a rookie head coach for the full
season.
year.
Right.
I feel like you
That's
get
fair
1 year
enough.
under your
Okay.
belt, and then you get to go into it. But we've seen a lot of things here so far. Of course, Titans have so many needs right now. And this Senior Bowl kind of gives you a great glimpse into all of the different kind of position groups that the Titans could eventually take in the NFL draft, especially on day 1 and 2. But then when they have the majority of their picks on day 3, the one we talk about all the time, we talk about the offensive tackles, we talk about the edges on all of our shows. But the one that I think continues to fly under the radar for the Titans and is still a pretty big need is the wide receivers here this week. And, maybe this class of wide receivers is not as stacked as last year's Senior Bowl, but there's still a lot of guys to like. And so while it may not be, with the first overall pick, certainly, but maybe not even with the 35th overall pick, there's still a lot of potential for the Titans to take one of these guys on early day 3, a 4th-round guy, a 5th-round guy, even if they can trade back up into the 3rd and get a 3rd-round pick to take one of these guys. We're going to discuss some of the guys we've seen over the first 2 days here that have really stood out to us that we should keep on our radar as we continue the draft process. The first 2 I do want to get out of the way, and your thoughts on them who aren't here. The wide receiver out of Stanford, Alec Ayumanor, and the wide receiver out of TCU, Savion Williams. They did not participate this week, but I know both of us were so intrigued to see them. They're guys that I'm still going to have on my radar even throughout the rest of this process. Ayumanor would have been a nice, maybe refreshing take on the wide receivers here. We see a lot of fast, speedy guys, but not the big guys who really win with their body and separation, which is an unfortunate thing. And then Savion Williams, a guy I know you
talk about a big body, man. Yeah. And he's somebody that I texted you the day the day before we came out here, and I said I'm looking through Savion's profile for the first time, and I'm not understanding what went wrong at TCU or why the production was the way that it was, considering the size, the production profile. When you dig into the advanced stuff on him, he seems like he's going to be a really intriguing prospect for teams that want a bigger body guy who can win with physicality. And he didn't really do much of that this year at TCU. Not a great quarterback situation, not a great coaching situation. Maybe that's really all it is. But I wanted to see him out here best on best against his peers, and we didn't get to. So hopefully we see him at the Combine, I guess.
Biggest boom-bust player because he played a lot of wide receiver, a lot of running back, a lot of tight end. Those are the things you really wanted to see, but we weren't able to. Let's talk about the guys who were indeed here, and I think the star of the show so far this week has been Oregon wide receiver Tez Johnson, and he's really quite an enigma right now. You talk about the reps that he's putting on tape here in practice. One of the most fluid route runners and just so good at getting that separation. But he gets that separation because of his fluid motion and not because of his size. I mean, he is.
What's his size, JT?
He's less than 165 pounds, which is
156. Is what
156 is not.
It's not many pounds. Is the point.
It's not a lot. I think I have about 20 on him, give or take here.
Yeah, I've got him at 5'10", 156 is what I wrote down. It's somewhere in that ballpark, and that ballpark isn't no good if you're an NFL receiver. I don't know. Sorry to cut you off. It's just like you're right that on paper you're like, oh, and then you watch him out here this week, and so far through 2 days, he's been one of the best in terms of just pure production. He's been one of the best receivers we've seen out here. He's making plays. He's been early today. He was kind of unguardable, and he had a couple reps in a row. You're like, this guy's just making it happen. Maybe you want to have a conversation about the utility of that kind of guy in the modern NFL and the importance of fit for where that guy goes, and a coach that's going to utilize them in a way that is unique to their skill set or maybe lack of fortification physically. Because you can get that guy hurt in a hurry, and it's going to be a problem for you.
He does, and yet still there are moments where you see him bouncing off these receivers, finding other ways besides using his physicality to create separation here, and I think that's one of the things that makes him such an intriguing prospect. You kind of go back to 2 drafts ago where you had Tank Dell here at these All-Star games, and it's like somehow
bigger than this guy.
Tank Dell's somehow bigger than Tez Johnson. However, for me, the athleticism and what he's putting out there, something about him tells me I got burned once by saying Tank Dell was too small, and even though he has been hurt 2 years, and now Tank Dell maybe is going to have a hard time coming back.
Dude, no kidding. Brutal.
Still, the talent when he is on the field kind of outweighs that, and I think he's an intriguing prospect on day 3 right now. I certainly don't think I would consider taking him on day 2.
He's 85 right now on the consensus big board is what I have written down. That feels right to me. That feels fringe top 10 receiver in this class. And whatever team, again, where he goes is so important. If he's going to go to some prehistoric offense, like if you give him to somebody that you don't trust to use him in a modern, innovative way, I'm going to be really concerned for his NFL career.
Yes.
But if you give him to Mike McDaniel or Sean McVay or somebody that's going to know how to use this guy behind the line of scrimmage and let's find ways to not get this guy touched, then I'm excited about what he can do.
Yes, I agree. Moving on to 2 of the Iowa State guys that we saw here today. The one that has really stole the show so far, Jalen Noel.
Yep.
Jalen Noel and then his counterpart, I believe Jaden Higgins. Both of them have put things on tape, but Jalen Noel really on the second day of the Senior Bowl here has popped. The quarterbacks started to maybe get a little better than they were on day 1.
Low bar.
It was a low bar to clear, but Jalen Noel was making the most of it. And currently at his ADP, you look at the consensus big board, 126. He's a guy that if he stays, he might continue to move up. But if you can get him, where the Titans are picking in the first part of of round 4, it's it feels like a steal right now for this Titans team.
Yeah, and he's again the theme here, like you said, it's smaller, shiftier, speedier guys, and I have Noel listed at 5'10", 200, so he's actually among the bigger version. We're going to talk about some other guys in a minute, I'd imagine, who relatively similar play style. They're going to offer you the same things in an offense. Noel's got a little bit more beef, a little more meat on the bone, and it doesn't take away from his ability to be a separator in space, to shake a defender, to work through contact at the line of scrimmage. He feels as do-it-all as you're getting from that style of receiver out here. Yep. He feels the most versatile in that way. And talk about, again, it's the tape is king, and what we see at Mobile is like a bizarro Funhouse Mirror version of these guys. But out here, it's translated. Like what we have seen from him on tape looks like the guy that we're seeing out here on the field, and he has had a couple plays the past couple days where people have gotten up out of their seats. Yeah,
and then Jaden Higgins, a little bit different, bigger body guy. You saw him kind of making some separating plays down the field, getting into the end zone. One of those guys who stretches the field more than maybe a Noel, but both those guys are going to be super intriguing. Noel, for me, though, is the one that they would target there. Moving on to some of the other guys we saw here today, one of the most interesting ones, Xavier Restrepo out of Miami.
Yeah.
Some good things, some not so great things. He's fine, right? He plays where you are looking at a guy like Xavier Restrepo is with his hands. His ability to catch the ball is his biggest, I would say, pro in his game. Mm-hmm. The route running is not exactly what you want, but another interesting option, I imagine he would be on, that third round, late day 2, something that the Titans would have to move and make some space.
The board is at 66 right now. It's kind of a weird spot for the Titans. Yep. We're standing in front of our guy Braden Gall, who I was talking to about earlier, and credit to him on this. Like he was talking about how Restrepo's cool and fine, and I agree with him that when you look at a guy, and he's been pounding the drum on this for weeks, it sounds like, Noel is like very similar size and shape and style, and is just better at football.
Yes.
And is slated to go like 60 picks later than him.
Yes.
That will change. Yeah. But I wouldn't be surprised if just name value alone, Restrepo ends up going ahead of Noel, and Noel is the better player.
2 more guys as we wrap up here on the second part of the practice. A guy who we continue to see making plays. Ty Felton out of Maryland is someone I think you have to keep
there. Was not on my radar until I got here.
Yes,
and then who's that guy?
He's one that I would continue to put on the radar from Maryland. A day 3 guy probably right now, but I think there's some things to like there, especially on the outside. I think he can play on the inside, on the outside. He has the
6'2",
ability.
185, but it's not like a super lean 185. He's got some bulk to him.
And then the last guy, Jalen Royals out of Utah State. Another guy today that really popped.
Yeah.
I heard, though, that he has been working through some things injury-wise, which is...
He missed the back half of last year with an injury, the nature of which I've forgotten at this point. It all runs together. But I know that he played like 6 or 7 games, I think, of the year before he had to dip out at Utah State. And he probably would have a much higher. I mean, right now consensus board is at 79. He'd probably have a much higher draft stock. 6 foot flat, 205. Another guy that, in the same vein as Jalen Noel from Iowa State, they're about as do it all as you can get out of a guy with that body type, that height restriction. They're not a slot only, despite the lack of size. I think that their skill set enables them to play multiple positions in an offense, and that's what NFL teams are looking for if they're going to draft you on day 2.
Yeah, and it's going to be super exciting. We have one more day here at the Senior Bowl, the last day of practice before everything wraps up for the game on Saturday, and then we're on to the Combine and so much more. Easton, appreciate you taking this time to talk some wide receivers. Yeah. One last question. Are we eating tacos tonight at Winsel's?
Thanks for having me, man.
Okay. Well, this has been great. Thank you to our sponsors, ML Rose and Sinkers Beverages, for making it happen here at the Senior Bowl. For all of our content for this entire week, if you missed some of our episodes from the previous 2 days, if you want to catch up and check out what we have going on tomorrow, as Easton does not want. I'm going to put the picture on. I'm putting the picture up. But the picture. I'm going to put the picture up.
The internet, the AI is incredibly powerful. You can make anything these days.
That is true.
And you can. It's fake news. It's garbage publication you're running.
He's Easton Freeze on Twitter. I'm at JT_Ruhnke. Make sure you are subscribed to the 440 Sports Network YouTube channel, where you can get all of this inside coverage along with our podcast and so much more. And until our shows, we'll see you then. There you go. Have them mute the mic. So that is our wide receiver conversation there. Certainly building on top of some of those things. Jalen Noel, I think, continues to pop on day 3. He's one of my favorite guys that I think the Titans could really look for in that late day 2, early day 3, with certainly one of their 4th round picks. He's a guy who I think ultimately outshone his teammate Jaden Higgins there this week. He certainly is a guy who wins on the inside, and with his speed and his ability to turn on a dime. He was one of the most impressive guys there. In the comments here, we had a question, I think, Adam saying, Royals feels like a Titan, like a mixture of Green Bay wide receivers and KC wide receivers. Thick, explosive, tough guy. Good late day 2, early day 3 guy. I also agree. Something to note about Royals is that there were kind of concerns. Something didn't really seem to be totally 100% right, and that's because he told us that he wasn't 100% healthy. He said he felt like he was only 80% all week, so if he still continued to kind of impress at only 80%, I can't imagine and can't wait to see what 100% looks like. He's a guy that I think they should also target in this upcoming draft here. A couple other guys, Ty Felton out of Maryland, I think continues to look like one of the smoothest route runners outside of Tez Johnson. I mean, he's just silky smooth, even at 156 pounds. There's a lot of wide receivers that, in this kind of mold of the Green Bay system that Chad Brinker comes from, where you're taking these kind of guys. I do think that Royals, Noel, maybe even a Higgins kind of fits that mold there. However, going to be a lot of interesting guys that they can look for this draft. The last thing I want to talk about before we get out of here and end this wonderful and amazing week we had at the Senior Bowl. Let's talk about some of the tight ends and running backs. It's certainly not a position of need necessarily, but we heard from Brian Callahan this week about how there's a lot of good tight ends in this class, and there certainly didn't hear from him specifically, but it's just a fact. This is such a deep running back class. Now, could the Titans necessarily take one of those guys in or maybe around day 3? I don't think it's out of the picture whatsoever. And, the tight ends maybe stole the show this week, starting with Elijah Arroyo from Miami. He certainly just looked unstoppable all week, even pulling a Will Levis and punting the ball into the stands after a touchdown this week. Big body who is still a fluid mover and just kind of wins his routes, even if you try to out physical him. A guy who I think, in the Titan system, I don't think you would necessarily take him at 35. I think he's tight end 3 behind Loveland and Warren right now after his performance at the Senior Bowl. But if you were to trade back and you are targeting him maybe late 50s, early 60s, if you have a pick in there, I certainly would not hate that, even though the narrative around it, right? It is not a premium position, but we keep hearing if you take, regardless of position, you take the good players, like Mike Borgonzi said. And if you can get your hands on a guy like Arroyo who can be that pass catching tight end that we've seen Chig kind of mature into, but don't necessarily have. I think that could be really interesting. A couple other guys, Terrence Ferguson, Mason Taylor, Jake Burningstool, guys who I think the Titans could target on early day 3. A guy who I think is the most intriguing one out of them, Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green. Certainly had up and down. I think size is a concern for him at the next level, but he has a lot of things that I like about him. And then the running backs in this class, I do think, for what it's worth, and Titans fans may not like this, but I think it's an eventuality here that even if they have Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears on the roster, the Titans very much might end up with a running back in this class. Maybe not necessarily super high, but with one of their 6th or 7th round picks, I think you could look at a guy like Damian Martinez out of Miami, or a Trevor Etienne, who I think had one of the best weeks out of the running backs here. A guy who, if they were to really like one of them and pull the trigger maybe earlier on day 3, Devin Neal, I think had a pretty impressive week. Certainly was able to beat up on the linebackers who weren't great this week. Bossa out of Oregon, I think, was the best, but outside of that, there wasn't a lot to love here. And then one other guy, Brashard Smith, I certainly, caught my eye and could be a guy that they take a late round flyer on. Currently 225 on the consensus big board, could be a 7th round pick. Zach saying, Lou Man said to take it to the bank, running back is happening. You certainly could be. Lou Man has not been around, but his words will be with us forever. Stevie saying, I have faith in Chig, and I don't disagree with you. I think Chig has, if this was year 4 or we're going into year 4 of Chig, he has gotten better and better every single year. But still, I mean, Brian Callahan comes from an offensive system in Cincinnati where multiple tight ends were being used constantly. We kind of saw that a little bit with Nick Vannett this year alongside Chigakonkwo. Josh Wiley, for my money's worth, continues to be the odd man out. And if they were to bring in a new tight end, still would continue to be the odd man out. But regardless of what position they play, if you can get a good pass catcher in here in a Brian Callahan offense, I think you absolutely have to do that. And that's going to be one of the narratives, I think, as we continue on. The Titans have a lot of holes at positions that aren't necessarily valued the most in the NFL draft. And as we continue down these late rounds, a lot of these guys that we saw here at the Senior Bowl could be the guys they end up picking. And it certainly will be very, very interesting. And with that, I think it's going to be a wrap on our Senior Bowl coverage from this week. It was a wonderful week. If you missed any of our shows or all of them, you can go back on the 440 Sports YouTube channel. They're all there, as well as the Hot Read podcast feed, either on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast. Had a good conversation with Braden Gall yesterday about some of the SEC players and Mike Borgonzi's thoughts on the draft. Monday or Tuesday show, Stoney Keeley talking about what he saw before he unfortunately went down at the Senior Bowl. Took him to the grave right now, but a lot of good content, as well as if you wanted to see more of those little interviews, we'll have them coming up on the 440 Sports YouTube channel. Thank you once again to our wonderful and amazing sponsors, ML Rose and Sinkers Beverages, for making this all happen and delivering our product this week on the 440 Sports Network to you free of charge. Remember, if you're in the East Nashville area, check out Sinkers Beverages, because they, have been in business taking care of that local community for close to 40 years. And they simply have the best selection. And then 7 locations in Nashville to go get a craft burger and one of the 25 beers on tap that Emerald Rose has to offer. Simply cannot beat it. We'll be back. No show tomorrow, as it is a travel day for me. And I'm sure we'll hear some of the thoughts that Stoney had on next week's show, because he, once again, is staying here for the game. Whatever happens there, we'll talk about it and so much more next Tuesday. And until then, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We will talk to you later.